side where we said they would call in on their side an ally to keep from losing the war. Now, when you call in someone who's a powerful nation, like they did in those days, to help, it simply meant that not only did they conquer their opponent, but they too were swallowed up. But of course, this is exactly what happened. Now we find in some of their most bitter international warfare, some of the Greeks called in the Macedonians to their aid, and Alexandria had a very well-trained and brilliantly commanded army, and there are two men in all past history that stand out as generals of ability above and beyond all the others. One is Alexander the Great, and the other was the Hannibal of Carthage. You remember the fellow that took the elephants over the mountains. Anyway, it is perhaps a toss-up which was the most brilliant from a military standpoint. Now we find that under Alexandria's leadership, the Macedonian army was irresistible. Alexandria simply conquered and took over the various Greek cities, and he incorporated them into his new empire that he was just starting, and they all went on looking for more worlds, so to speak, to conquer, and he conquered Asia Minor and Syria and Palestine around 332 BC. He conquered the Tiger-Euphrates valleys, which made up the old Assyrian and Babylonian empires, and by 331 BC, he went on to conquer Medo-Persia, which was then called Bactria, and today is called Afghanistan. It lies just outside of India, just north of the famous Khyber Pass, and today it's the gateway to India. Now, Alexander also, he went down into northern India, and he conquered quite a considerable area in northern India. So that all the then known civilized world from Greece to India was incorporated into one empire. And as you remember, before his death, Alexandria, he was moaning and groaning and mooning around, worrying because there were no more worlds left for him to conquer. He was a brilliant general, but that's all you could say for him, because he was a debauched drunkard, and he finally died from his, shall we say, using the vernacular of today, his lifestyle, around 323 BC. Now, Alexandria, he built nothing. He conquered. As an individual, he ruled and conquered the nations, but when he died, there was nothing left to hold them together. His empire broke up exactly as had been prophesied by Daniel, that his kingdom would be divided in the four winds of heaven, and it would not go to his posterity, is what I'm trying to say, because his four leading generals under him each took over approximately 1/4 of the empire, where they were, and in those few years between 334 and 323 BC, this enormous empire was built and then turned around and crumbled. So you have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Alexander's empire. Now the next in line, it was the last of these series of these Gentile empires that was prophesied by Daniel, was Rome. The city itself was founded according to the Roman tradition in 753 BC, and the Republic of Rome was organized about 500 BC, and with organization of the Republic began its expansion in a tremendous empire, and Macedonia and Greece into a tremendous empire, and Egypt was incorporated into the empire around 168 BC, and from there the Romans moved on into Western Asia, North Africa, and on, of course, into a great portion of Western Europe. Eventually, the Roman Empire ruled Italy and Spain, what they then called Gaul, which was France, extending very slightly into Germany, Macedonia, Greece, Egypt, North Africa, Western Asia Minor, and Syria and Palestine. Now we find that the frontiers of this Roman Empire were the Atlantic Ocean, the Irish Sea, the south borders of Scotland, to the North Sea, to the River Rhine, to the Danube River and the Black Sea and the Caucasian Mountains, through Armenia to the middle of the ancient Babylonia, to the Arabian Desert and the Red Sea and Nubia and the Sahara Desert and the Morocco Mountains. These were its boundaries. The image, of course, had two legs, and so the Roman Empire broke up into two. It was divided into a western and an eastern empire at about 283 A.D. The capital of the eastern portion of the empire was set up in what we call Byzantium, and being rebuilt and modernized, so to speak, made into a tremendous city by Constantine, and had its name changed to Constantinople, and it remained the capital of the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Now, while it claimed that at all times to be the capital of the Roman Empire, you find it generally spoke of as the Byzantine Empire, from the old and well-known name of the for its capital city, Byzantium. I'm trying to say, I got tongue-tied and I pronounced it wrong there. But anyway, we find that the western portion of the empire, which gradually was losing its hold on Europe, had its capital part of the time, but not all of it, in Rome. And for example, the city of Ravenna in Italy was the capital for a time, but it was broken up by the Visigoths, who actually were an Israelite people that were on the march around 410 A.D. Now, you remember, under the pressure of the invading Visigoths, the Romans, they pulled the last of their legions of soldiers out of Britain, bringing them home for the defense of Rome, because they were having serious problems at home around 408 A.D. Now, that year, they succeeded in buying off the Visigoth invaders who had come into northern Italy, but had not yet taken the city of Rome. Then the Romans bought them off with a big money bribe, but around 410 A.D., the Visigoths had spent the money, so they took the city of Rome, looted it, smashed everything, and thereafter there was merely just a theocratical pretense, shall we say, of any so-called Roman Empire. It was just there in name only, existing. What was left of it was in the west. However, the Romans, who were a wily people, they suggested to the Visigoths that there was some wonderful lands which had been a part of the old Roman Empire. They said, why don't you go and move into them? There's some beautiful fertile valley country over in Spain, and we'll give it to you. Why don't you stay there? That seemed like a good idea to the Visigoths. Those centuries of frightful misrule under the Roman emperors had reduced Italy to such a stage of poverty and general falling apart that there wasn't much worth staying for anyway. So the Visigoths, they moved across the southern France through the Pyrenees and into Spain. And sometime before about 420 A.D. until the Moorish conquest in 711 A.D., the Visigoths were the dominant people in Spain. Now, they didn't exterminate all the previous inhabitants of Spain. And in fact, some of the previous inhabitants of Spain were true Israel people themselves, for that matter. Because the Vandals, this was a tribe that had moved down there from southern Scandinavia, and were always, and they were already in there. Now, they were not driven out immediately because they were very numerous, and later they moved into North Africa, where of course they were swept up in the Arab and Moorish empires, and later became extinct. That is, they were absorbed into the darker peoples of that area. And so today, you go there and you see a lot of these people that have the Nordic noses and features, and a lot of them with blue eyes. And you wonder who they were. Well, this was the Vandals that they absorbed into them. So then in Spain, you had a defiant Israel people, the Visigoths, as the ruling race, and in Portugal also, until they were conquered by the Moors. Thereafter, there was much pollution of the original Israel blood in Spain, which invariably happens when the Israel people were overrun by non-Israelite invaders, just like what's going on in our country today. This never happened in northern Europe, and for that reason the Scandinavian people today are a pure Israelite stock. As we've said before, you go to Reykjavik, Iceland, you land at the airport. They've probably removed it since then, but a few years ago it said, "Welcome to Iceland, the land of Benjamin." And those people knew for many centuries, they knew that they were settled there in about 78 A.D., and they knew they were true Israel. Now, you cannot say of Italy or of Spain that as a nation they are Israel, because they're not. There are too many other peoples there. But you can say that amongst them there are many who are definitely of the ancient Israel ancestry. So we find the Western Roman Empire came to its end. All pretense of being an empire was abandoned around 476 AD, and the Eastern or the Byzantine half of the Roman Empire was reduced to Asia Minor and the Balkan states by Muslim power. So by 650 AD, the Turks, they had captured most of Asia Minor by 1074 AD. Now, it was between 1204 and 1260, the so-called Latin Empire of Constantinople was made up of the troops of the Fourth Crusade and the Republic of Venice, ruled briefly over by the remaining territory, but the old Byzantine Empire was restored, at least in theory, actually governing nothing but Constantinople and its suburbs. And so in the middle of the 1260s, the last trace of it disappeared with the capture of Constantinople by the Turks in 1453 AD, which we went into the fact, and Revelation talks about this, and we showed that they used mortars, and I believe that they possibly had it before the Chinese, and it was the vain, egotistical, self-centered, reprobate nobles of France and of Europe, calling themselves Catholics, professing to be a Christian. They had gone awry, and so the Almighty brought these people out of the pit, as we showed you, and went after these people. But anyway, we've covered that for those that might be interested in other tapes. So we go back here and we find the first of these vision in Daniel, and of all these series of the four great world empires, Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Alexandria of Macedonia, and Rome, were given in the vision of the great statue. The image of the four different metals. This is exceedingly important because we find that the great bulk of recorded history is covered by these series of empires, but this thing was given to Daniel again in a different vision. For this, we now go to the 7th chapter of Daniel, and here's where we start getting off on this, getting off into this remarkable beast, plural, my friends. Daniel saw this vision himself, this sight. He said that there were four great beasts that come up out of the sea, diverse, in other words, different from one another. As you know, the sea is used in the Bible. A lot of times it's symbolic of people, of the great masses, and many times refer to the great sea of non-Israel type people. So out of the great masses of these non-Israel people, we find that these, what is called erroneously in the Bible, the great Gentile empires, which simply means nations, and nations of those that were non-Adamic, non-Adamites, non-Nordic, non-Aryan or Teutonic or Lombardic. But anyway, these great Gentile empires in the true sense, you see four great beasts, different from one another. Now the first beast was like a lion that says had an eagle's wings, and Daniel 7 and verse 4 says, "And I beheld, till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand upon his feet like a man, and it had a man's heart was given to us." Now we find that the word man in this particular sentence in the Chaldean word was Enash, E-N-A-S-H, which is derived from the same root word near Hebrew, Enosh, which you heard me speak of, which distinguishes the non-Adamic type people from the Adamic people. And so we find that the Adamic peoples are mentioned, and the Hebrew word Adam is used, and there's also the word Ish, which means simply a male person of any race, and it's used sometimes referring to Adamic people. But we find here where the word Enosh is used, it is speaking of non-Israel people, and speaking in general in a rather derogatory sense by mentioning this Chaldean word Enosh. You remember that the book of Daniel is written partly in Hebrew and partly in Aramaic. A lot of people don't understand that, and they're not aware of this. And we find the portion of the book that pertains to non-Israel people are written very much more widely used in the Aramaic language, which was spoken everywhere from southern Babylon right up into the Fertile Crescent through Assyria and Syria. In other words, it was spoken everywhere in Western Asia, rather than in the earlier days in Palestine, when the related but not quite identical Hebrew language was used. And we find, as we go back to Daniel's vision of the first of these beasts that came out of the sea, it tells us was like a lion, and the eagle's wings were plucked off. It was made to stand erect on its hind leg like an Enosh man. It was given the heart of an Enosh man. Now, what are we going to do with these mysteries? It sounds like maybe it's unsolvable, but let's look into it and see if the Bible doesn't self-interpret it. Behold, another beast, a second like unto a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth, and each between the teeth of it. And they said unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had on the back of its 4 wings of a fowl. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given unto it. In other words, power was given to it, and dominion over something and somebody. And after this, I saw in the night vision, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and had great iron teeth. In other words, my friends, it's talking about it had great military might, because when you use allegorically and symbolically, you talk about lions and bears and leopards, and you've heard me talk in past tapes about Job, and it talks about the teeth, and it talks about the eyes. Well, the teeth of iron. It's talking about sophisticated weaponry, more advanced than anything that was spoken of in the past history. All right, but it goes on to say that it devoured and broke in pieces, and it stamped the residue with its feet of it, and it was diverse from the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, this is Daniel, 7th chapter, verses 6 to 7. Now, remember what we said about the 4th empire of Rome, the iron, the 4th kingdom, which shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all of these things, that iron breaks all of these things, shall it break in pieces and bruise. That we quoted to you back from Daniel 2 and 40. Now, I want to remind you once again that it talks about when Yahshua, which God incarnate, when he comes back, he reestablishes his kingdom here upon this earth and sets up his empire. He said, I will rule with the rod of iron. In other words, it ain't going to be with hugs and love and kisses. There's going to be a whole lot of mashing. But anyway, let's get back to this now. Here again we find this beast. It had iron teeth and was terribly strong. It devoured and it broke in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it. So here again in the vision was the same succession of empires, again in making clear that this was Rome, by a similarity of certain identifying features and symbolism of it. Then the angel explained to Daniel the meaning of this vision. He said, These great beasts which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. And Daniel says, I would know the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, and who was so exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. Daniel 7:19. So the angel explains it to him. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse or different from all these other kingdoms, and he shall devour the whole earth, shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And then the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he's going to be different from the first, and he's going to subdue 3 kings. Daniel 7:23 to 24. Now, we could go into some further symbolism here at this point if you need to follow this up, but for the present we don't. We have identified previously these different kingdoms and the succession of empires, and so I'm not going to bother to try to identify each one of these 10 horns and so forth at this point, as we have other things to cover. Let us go back now for just a moment. We find the first king was like a lion. You remember in the vision of the great statue, was the head on which was of gold. It was superior to the others in a degree of culture. Likewise the power, the lion, the most powerful of all the beasts. We've all heard in our lifetime where they called a king of beasts, and is speaking in symbolic here of a great military power and a high civilization, which are but with only the characteristics of Enosh. They lacked in power the spiritual capacity of the people of Israel, even with all of their faults. Now the second kingdom, you remember, it was like a bear, and it raised himself up on one side. Well, this is that Medo-Persian Empire, originally called Media, north of Persia proper, which was the leading kingdom during the first stage of this great empire. Now, we find as they expanded westward, they scattered with the sword the empire of Assyria, which was north of Babylon, which, of course, was done under the dominance of Media, and then Persia gained the dominance. So it raised itself up on one side. In other words, Media and Persia were not equal. They were the unequal power of two kingdoms in one. It also says that there were three ribs in its mouth. It conquered and absorbed three great empires, Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt. Now for identification, here it is unmistakable. Now the third empire, the third beast that came up out of the sea of these Enosh people, they were like a leopard. And certainly you could not have taken a better symbol with its swift, striking, terrible power. And it said it had 4 wings and 4 heads. In other words, already while it still had a single empire under Alexandria, it had in it the seeds of this breakup into 4 parts, and dominion was given unto it, yet dominion it certainly had. We find that Alexander, he conquered all of the previous empires that had ruled. He occupied, he conquered Egypt. He went on to take over all that the empires of Assyria and Babylon and Medo-Persia that they had ruled, including portions of northern India, as it's called today. And this is why that we find a lot of those descendants, even though previous to this, in the great ancient days of antiquity, we find that what is called the Norsemen, the Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Nordic, Teutonic, Lombardic, Germanic type peoples that came out of India that were called the Aryans. And even though they had moved out, and then we find Alexandria, he reunited these people, and they went back in and they reconquered it. And so today, I imagine when you see a lot of these things, especially showing and referring to the Sikhs and so forth, there in the great fertile valleys of Indra, or India as it's called today, that you see these blue-eyed and red-bearded men and so forth who still carry some of that Nordic blood brought with some of the combined Greek forces that went with Alexandria, who also, and later on, people don't understand. These are the very people who went up into the Scottish and the British Isles, that they were descendants of the Greeks. Now, finally, there was the fourth one, the beast that was dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and he would devour the whole earth. Well, it covered all of the then-known world, and all that was so-called civilized enough to be known at that time, all but the easternmost portion of the earlier empire. Rome did not penetrate into Afghanistan, or as they called it, Bactria then, or India, but it had everything west of that. And now as you look into that valley and you see what a cost of men and supplies and lives, and with the weapons of those days, it would be virtually impossible to defeat. But anyway, so they didn't want to spend the time and the men and the energy. It wasn't worth it. So Rome also had what the other empire had never had. It had all of Europe except Germany. Isn't that odd, you see? It had northern Africa, but was excluded from all the principal lands then occupied by the people of Israel. It only overran England, where the Israel people were, but as yet very few in number, because the bulk of the Israel people had not come into England. There was just a tiny handful there before the withdrawal of the great Roman legions. And it said that this beast would break in pieces, and he would devour all things. And remember in Daniel 2, verse 40 says, "And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks into pieces, and subdues all things, that iron breaks all of these, and it shall break into pieces and bruise. Then Daniel said the fourth beast was diverse or different from all the others, and went before it. It originated as a republic. But remember, while republics were known in Greece before this time, they were small cities. They were not great empires. This is the first time in all history that there was a republic rising to the power of a great conquering empire. You remember, my friends, isn't it a sad note that Washington came out and told us the form of government? He said, you have an empire if you can keep it. Not an empire, I mean a republic. But now we have these bureaucrats and demorats and all of these other good politicians, the best that money can buy. They all stand up there and say, our great democracy, our great mob rule. Well, anyway, oh God, I don't want to go off on a tangent. Now we find that this next vision, or the sight in which Daniel was able to look into a time machine or into a future age, or shown by a great extraterrestrial, there's something here so great and scientific, but we pass it off as a religious experience. But the next vision, it obviously concerns the whole of the same four empires, but now you have a tie-in with the book of Revelation, because here you have these four beasts that are rising out of the sea, the great sea of people, and we will note that when we get to the book of Revelation, where John was given a vision, it was a beast which rose out of the sea, but there's one beast combined itself into the characteristic of the first four, so obviously you have a connection here which cannot be overlooked. But for more confirmation of this order, in the 8th chapter of Daniel, he was given another vision, that of a ram, of a goat, and he said, then I lifted up my eyes, and I looked, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and these 2 horns, they were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last, and I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hands, but he did according to his will, and he became great. And as I was considering, behold, the goat came out of the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram who had 2 horns, which I'd seen standing before the river, and ran into him with the fury of his power. And then I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with anger against him, and he broke his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and he stamped him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hands. Therefore this goat waxed very great, and he was strong, and he was great, and the great horn was broken. And for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. Daniel 8:3-8. So the angel gave him the explanation of this. Now remember, this is prophecy before it ever happened. Like the good book, and I say over and over, like the Almighty says, how do you know that I'm God? He said, I tell you then from the beginning. I don't hear none of these other religions out there make any bold prophecy, and I don't see where any of them came to pass. You know, people, I go to the bookstores continuously, and I see people walk by dozens of Bibles and commentaries and all of these wonderful books, and they'll go over and they'll fight over an old book of Nostradamus. Oh, well. But remember, this was prophecy that was before that happened. This is while Babylon was still at the apex of its power, and this great extraterrestrial messenger, described by the Greeks as an angel, he said, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, but the rough goat is the king of Greece, or Gracia, Grecia. The great goat that is between, the great horn, I'm trying to say, that was between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of that nation, but not in his power. Daniel 8:20-22, and it was written sometime in the middle of the third of the 500 BC, 550, 545, somewhere in there. And the fall of Babylon did not come till about 538 BC. So this was 2 centuries before the rise of this great Alexandria, or Alexander the Great. Now we want you to note again the accuracy of the prophecy. The ram that had the 2 horns, Media and Persia, and both were high, but one was higher, and the higher one came up last. Persia was the one that came to power later, absorbing Media. Concerning the rough goat, the cultured Greeks, they despised all Macedonians as being nothing more than crude barbarians. But of course the Greeks, they despised absolutely everybody else in the world as being barbarians, because they were recognized only 2 classes, Greeks and barbarians. And if you weren't a Greek, you were a barbarian. Anyway, the Greeks, they looked down upon the Macedonians maybe more than some of the others, because they were a rough, tough bunch. And when he was strong and the great horn was broken, Alexander died at the very height of his power, as we said before, around 323 BC. You remember in the earlier versions of the 4 beasts that came up out of the sea that Alexander had been compared to a leopard. And I take this, and I'm going to read it now from the History of Nations that was published here by P.F. Collier and Sons. Alexander was one of the generals who won by rapid strokes and daring experiences. His long marches were perhaps the most characteristic part of his career. Urged on by him, his army seemed to be able to annihilate time and space. And we find the rapidity of their motion was almost incredible. He was on the spot where his enemies believed him to be still hundreds of miles away. And then once arrived, Alexander had an eagle eye for seizing the moment to strike. And he hardly ever made a mistake. His attacks, however, were reckless, and they succeeded to the point that they should have been called miracles. And so we find Alexander is compared to the leopard. The leopard is not a big animal, but it's terrifically strong for its size, and it's fast. In fact, it's one of the fastest animals in the world, outside of what is the cheetah, I believe. And it makes his attack in the very same way. Now 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of that nation, but not in his power. And all the members of the family of Alexander the Great were assassinated in the struggle for power. So then we go on, we find that Egypt was taken over by his general Ptolemy the First, and that's Ptolemy the First, and Thrace, Thrace, the old Macedonia, and Greece was taken over by Lysimachus, and Syria and Asia Minor went to Antigonus, and let's see, what was it, Cappadocia and Paphlagonia, which were eastern Turkey and the areas inland. To the south of it, it went to Eumenes, and it was to say that not in his power, that it is, or it was not an ordinarily or orderly division of the empire. But we find that each quarter was simply seized by the local commander on his own independent act, so that we find here that the great accuracy of Daniel's own independent vision that is beyond any question. Now, we're beginning to get into what the symbolism here is all about and what it really means. Now, let us turn to the one of my favorites I've quoted before, the 12th chapter, Revelation 12:1-5, and it says, "There appeared a great wonder in heaven, and a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another great wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head." Now it goes on. Now you've got to remember, I have used this in more than one way, as I feel that it's just like looking at a precious jewel of God or a great diamond, that there's many different sides to it. and is not all fulfilled at one age. And as we told you about the great war in the heaven, and the people of the woman, talking of the bride of the household of the Almighty, and it talked about the woman that stood with her feet upon the moon. And we explained that at one day and age and time that there were stations upon the moon, and I believe that in one age that it was systematically bombed. There was a great civilization there that was destroyed. And so we find here that when it goes on, it talks about his tail. It's talking about this great dragon that drew a third of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, and to deliver her child. As soon as it was born, she brought forth a man-child that was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up into God and to his throne. Well, we've proved to you before who this was talking about, and your King James perversion says that he sat down to the right hand of God. Well, if Jesus Christ was not God incarnate and he was just the Son of God, since when did a son die and leave the woman Israel not just a divorced woman, but would have left her a widow woman, and the Almighty could come back for his bride and marry a widow woman? Well, so anyway, the Fenton gets it right. He said, and he only had the right to sit down as God. And so what is meant here by the symbolism, brought forth a man-child, talks about it was caught up to God and to his throne. And I think we've pointed out to who and where his throne was. Now the woman, unquestionably, here we find is Israel, because you have a repetition here of Joseph's dream back in the book of Genesis. And it says this about Joseph. And he dreamed yet another dream, and he told it to his brother, and he said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brother, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and my mother and my brother indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee and to this earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. You find this all in Genesis 37, 9 to 11. Now, showing that this has many sides to this allegory here, we look at the sun and the moon obviously represented Joseph's father. And we've pointed out before that there are many instances where we go back and we find King David. He spoke of the moon and he spoke of the stars, but he did not mention the sun, because he, from the other side, opposed to this king and this Baal and these representatives of the adversary that called themselves the sun, David knew he was setting as the sun, as the Almighty, representing the household of God. And we told you how that this planet Venus, recorded by the Indians and the Babylonians, had come in such close proximity to this earth, and that it was even brighter than the present-day light from our sun. But anyway, we go back here, so we find the sun and the moon obviously represented Joseph's father and Israel, his mother's 11 stars, of course, and Joseph himself being the 12th. So now you have a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, unmistakably talking about our progenitors of the Semitic people, talking about Israel. So when you read in Revelations 12 and 2, it says the woman was about to give birth to a child. It says Revelations 2:5, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, that I was telling you about before. And it speaks of a child that was caught up into the throne of God. So, my friend, let's stop on that note and stop and analyze this. Why do people get all bent out of shape? It talks about the throne of God, talks about the house of God, it talks about the holy city. But nobody that I know of in the last 2,000 years has ever bothered to look for or find or answer this mystery as the clue as to where it is. And people, these dunderheads, get bent out of shape when I try to tell them the great... Well, look, let's look at the New Testament as the last will and testament. Somebody died, which was the Messiah, and then that will became into effect that you might be a joint heir and inherit him with him, a future kingdom that you can participate in and take part in. And don't give me this old crap, and that's what it is, religious hogwash, that you're just spiritual Israel. Here he's talking about the people in the beginning of the book. He's talking about the same people in the end of the book. He's talking about the same people that Isaiah spoke of in the first chapter that would become blind to their identity as to who they were and from whence they came. He said that even an ox knows his master's crib and the sheep know their master. But our people, he said, there was a curse put over us that we would be blind. So we find that this woman unquestionably is called Israel, but the Scripture tells us that he was going to give his people a new name. We'll be called by the name of the Most High, called Christians, Christ followers. Unquestionably, it is the Israel of old, the descendants of Adam, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all of these great warriors of renown, because here we have a repetition of Joseph's dream. Back in the book of Genesis, it says this about Joseph, and he dreamed yet another dream, and he told it to his brothers. And I went through all of this, how there was this great envious that was caught up there, and they got all bent out of shape, and yet it correlates here with this Revelation 2:5. It talks about this Son, this God, this incarnation of God that was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Of course, the child that was to rule all the nations. It was unmistakably, the church world knows him as Jesus Christ. He was born, of course, as we're reminded of Paul, who came so far as the flesh is concerned of Israel, of all of the tribe of Judah. And so far as ruling all nations, we read in Revelation 19, verses 11, 15, and 16, I saw heaven opened. In other words, I pointed out to you before how heaven opened, and literally those doors that John spoke of, and he says, behold, a great white horse. And we explained to you what a horse was, that it was a Sous, S-O-O'-S, that it was you look it up in the Strong's Concordance, it talks about an iron chariot with a driver on the inside that can go a distance in it. Talks about something that travels like at the speed of light. And so we explained in past chapters that where Moses met this extraterrestrial angel in this burning machine, mistranslated a burning bush, and said, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. He wasn't talking about the shoes that he was wearing. He said, get ready to take off in the shoes. But anyway, we covered that, and we find here, I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True in righteousness, and he doth judge and make war, and out of his mouth goes a sharp sword. And that with it he would smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, the wrath of the Almighty God. And this was his vesture that was on his thigh, a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and to be caught up to the throne of God. In Hebrews, the 12th chapter, verse 2, he said, look unto Yahshua, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy has set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down, unfortunately, a King James says, the right hand of the throne of God. But I told you, you look that up in the Fenton. He said only he had the right to sit down as God, as Jesus himself said in Revelation 3:21, to him that overcometh, I will grant to sit with me, now get this, in my throne. I think I've explained that before. If you haven't got those tapes, you better go back and get them and see the great inheritance that you can inherit if only you will believe. Even as I also overcome, he said, and am set down as the Father in his throne. Now you're getting some more tying in with Daniel. We find that the dragon that stood before the woman that was ready to devour his child as soon as it was born. You say, wait a minute, I thought he was going to talk about 666, and we're talking about the dragon and the symbolizing the 666. And bear with us, talk about the 7 heads and the 10 horns, and Daniel's fourth beast, which was the Roman Empire, had 10 horns, and the dragon, of course, is Satan. And here you have the tie-in emphasizing the satanic character of the Roman Empire also, and what it generated into under the emperors in the earlier days. Under the Republic, they produced some men of stern and great character, although even at that stage their morals had decayed pretty badly under the emperors, and it reached the point where it couldn't have gotten any worse. Kind of like our Hollywood of today. only they had a lot more murders than we even see up on the screen. But I think at this time and at this point here we have just about run out of time. And so we will continue on into our next album, and we'll trace these mysteries down as to who the adversary is, and who's the mysterious man 666, and who are these the mysterious people that set up this Sabbath worship and erroneously and have us worshiping the Sunday, the seventh-day Sabbath. Recognize Jesus as creator of this world, and the Sunday observance is not from the Bible, but from the astrological worship of the sun god. Sunday is the first day of the week, not the seventh day of the week, from the Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, Volume 4, Schaff, Funk, and Wagnall's Company, 1894, page 2259. We read the following. Sunday, die solis of the Roman calendar, day of the sun, because it was dedicated to the sun, the first day of the week, and was adopted by the early Christendom as a day of worship. On the same page of this encyclopedia, we read the following. No regulations for its observance was laid down. Last album we left off, we discussed somewhat the 28th chapter of Ezekiel, which I think is one of the most exciting chapters that I have ever read. Of course, I guess that's because I'm a weirdo, because I'm a kook, because of my belief in flying saucers and the possibility that there's somebody out there, surely more intelligent than we here on this earth, who are continuously thinking of new scientific ways in which we might pollute our earth or self-destruct. Or as the scripture says, the blind leading the blind, or as the Messiah put it, we who perish for lack of knowledge. And the scriptures is full of it. It's nothing new that, why do you reject knowledge? You reject knowledge, and he said, I reject you. But what is so very sad, the religious world and the secular world and the scientific and the archaeological world and all of these trained brains that we have, they can't come and reason together because of their damnable male egos. We have some of these scientists, this one man who put together this book, The Monuments of Mars, all fabulous book. There's been others. There's been several people jump on the bandwagon and put out these books on the faces of Mars, the popular thing at the time, and I'm sure they made some quick walking around money. But then the next breath, after appearing on a radio station in Kansas City, the Mike Murphy show, who I think Mike Murphy's a wonderful person, and we appeared on a show. Then after that, this man who wrote the book got on, and they said, well, what about this other guy's theory that the so-called flood of the Bible was actually speaking of a great war in outer space, an intergalactic war? And then the translators of the scriptures polluted it. But he did agree that there was a possibility of that. This is not a brand new theory that I've come up with. I've heard it before throughout the years, but I never gave any credence to it because nobody ever gave me any evidence as to that possibility. So why should I accept it? Why should I jump on a new idea that comes along that contradicts 2,000 years of Bible teaching and churchy teaching, or the churchy entities teaching of the Bible? But if we put it together, keep an open mind, and let the juices flow and the thought processes and say, well, let's examine these things and see if there isn't a possibility. And so we go back, as I told you before, go back and read that 28th chapter of Ezekiel. It talks about this king, the great prince of Tyrus. And this fellow who said, I am a God. I sat in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. And I said it's talking about the sea of space. And then later on in the 14th verse, religion has not caught up with science. They don't understand what was being said here. It's talking about a extraterrestrial. No, not just one of the worker bees or the queen bee, but we're talking about one of the king bees. We're talking about what would be equivalent, what we would call a 5-star general. This man guarded the very space station, the very throne of the Almighty. It tells us so in this chapter. We explained in past cassettes, audio books, what a cherubim was, that it was a cherub, and we've gone into all of the different description of these ancient ships. And people, they get all bent out of shape, that they could possibly still be around, but the Almighty, like the other lesser lords of space, he says to me, a day is like 1,000 years. So, in other words, so in reality, what we're saying here, he's flying a machine that's only 5 days old. Now, you remember we went through all that. I don't think that I need to rehash all of this, but you go and read that Ezekiel very carefully, and you might want to get your Strong's Concordance out, and if you have some friends, or you're a group or a groupie, and well, I don't mean that the way it sounds, and you have an open mind, check into this and do cross-references from the center of your Bible. It's a fabulous, fabulous, exciting thing that I've barely touched it in. But let me remind you, verse 18, how it says they defiled my sanctuaries. We're talking about other planets. He says, by the multitude of thy iniquities and by the iniquity of thy traffic. And what were they trafficking in? And gold and silver and jewels. But you see, we've been so brainwashed by denominationalism, by religion, that we think that all angels and extraterrestrial, they're all a bunch of demons or devils and demonic spirits. But here's the outside of God, the one we call God, the Almighty Yahweh, that Father, which is in outer space, religion calls heaven, who is related possibly to you, and vice versa. Now, when this crowning cherubim, this one that they call Lucifer, but once again we say they ain't no such dude, and we explain how Satan, and we're talking about this fella that churchy ended. See, that's only a title. That's not a man's name. And we've tried to tie it down in our last audio cassette and several of them there as to who this guy was and how he came here and his people. And we pointed out, the scripture makes it quite plain that there's more than one of these devils, and that they were trafficking in all of these things. That, you see, the Almighty, these other people, they're body, soul, and spirit like you. And then we hear this expression that he was trafficking these things. My gosh, you say, well, wait a minute, they're bringing God and they're bringing this Satan. They're bringing him down to a level of us mere mortals. Now, mortal means subject to death and sickness and weakness. But the difference is that like Christ, he said, put your finger in my wound. Now, if we go along, and the consensus is that this Yeshua, the Messiah, he could change his molecular structure, and he could walk through walls, and he could eat and sleep, and he could walk and do all the functions of us, but he ascended into heaven into a perfect body. This is what blows everybody's mind. That to drink of the waters of life freely, to eat of the tree of life. It's talking about something very scientific, and it's talking about some people who are righteous, law keepers, who are going to walk the chalk and try to do things right, that they can drink of those waters freely, and they can take of the tree of life freely. Now, if there's any subject in all of the universe more important than this, immortality, please write to me and let me know what it could be. All right? Now let's go on. Now remember, the point is, on the monuments of Mars, this monument on the face of Mars where I say that Noah was. I say he was there. We're going to get to that. But I got to cover this 666 and who they were and what brought all of this about, and eventually we'll get into it. But you see, it's a secret, or secrets that have been hid right there before us in the libraries and in the archaeological records and the historical and the secular, and all of these different people have dug out bits and pieces, but nobody, as far as I know, has gone to the length and work in the years that I have to try to mold it or gel it into one great tapestry and see if it doesn't make sense. But the Almighty talks about this adversary, this Satan, the one who committed treason against his government, his laws, and became vain, egotistical, self-centered, overbearing, and the King Simon Legree of all of the galaxies out there. And let me remind you once again, when I got done, they was talking about he contaminated his sanctuaries. Now it's talking about something like temples, like a church, and the church is in people. People are the temple. People are the sanctuary. You are the church, not buildings. So he was talking about a dude here in the idioms of this ancient language. You've gone about from world to world, and you have contaminated my people, subverting and converting them to you and to your ideals, and your new set of laws that cannot work because they're not proven, like my eternal laws, what the Almighty is saying here. Man, this is so fantastic. So don't you think with all of this beauty, remember, it says that one of his downfalls was his vanity, this Narcissus complex that he has because of his own beauty, and I think this was carried over into the Greek legends of Narcissus, and that's from there, the love of self and admiring one's own beauty and being vain is carried over from this. You see, all of these fairy tales and things, they were all stolen from the original scriptures. Like we've said before, nothing new under the sun. And so this fellow was so vain, he built this head of himself on Mars. And it did survive the great destruction when Noah and a lot of other peoples fled before that great Holocaust, before it rained down rockets. Well, anyway, let us continue on now. Let's deal with this word Satanism, and we left off in the last few tapes there. We were talking about 666, or what I call the men of Mars, and we find that Satanism is the unifying theme which runs throughout all of this, showing its origin. And you remember we spoke of the dragon, and we see here the parables talked about the dragon is standing before the woman to devour her son. And we remember Herod, the Edomite Jew. You remember he tried to murder the infant Yeshua in the 2nd chapter of Matthew. We're told about that. He slaughtered all the male children up to the age of 2 in Bethlehem, and just to make sure that he wouldn't fail to kill the right one. So you see, if you ever needed it, this is further confirmation of the satanic origin and the character of this Herod. And I'm sure that his genealogy, now they say he was a Jew, and a lot of people don't understand Israelite. And you go back, he was of half Israelite. And he carried this Edomite blood, and in his veins ran the royal blood going way back, what I call tracing it clear back to Mars. He carried the blood of Edom in his veins. Now let us go back to the book of Revelation. We're going to go to the 13th chapter, where we're beginning to come to the beast. And John says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast. He rose out of the seas. So remember now, this beast is coming up out of the great masses of the non-Israel, the Enosh people, a beast having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, what did the dragon have? 7 heads and 10 horns. And the dragon, of course, he's always representative of Satan. Now, Up on his horns 10 crowns, and upon his head the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. It designates one beast, but having the composite characteristics of all of the earlier ones that we discussed, so that whereas each of these had originally, its turn had been all by itself a world empire. Now you have something which seems to be a homogeneous conglomeration, which was to succeed them, from which it would take in all of the previous empires and all of the same satanic character. As I spend a great deal of my life in search of libraries and references and so forth, well, let's say this, you get a sixth sense about people. And I find something so very interesting about the evil people, the evil ones, that they're not creative. God is the great creator, and you as the sons and daughters of the Most High, you are creators and have creative abilities. But these people, even though they're satanic, they have not the original thought to create something new, so they have to go back and they study history. See, they learn by history, and they see what worked and what did not work as to their advantage. And they research into the past how to destroy people's minds and body and soul and morality, and how to cause a civilization to be overtaken or decay from within. Now let us continue. We find, and it says, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. And it goes on to say, and I saw one of his heads, as it were, that was wounded unto death. And this deadly wound, though, but it was healed. And all of the world wondered after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things, and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, the Almighty, to blaspheme his name. Well, you know, even among Christendom today, they don't even know his original name. So it goes on to say, to blaspheme his name, and now get this, his tabernacle, his house, his place of abode. He knew the exact address of the holy city, of the seat of the Almighty, or here as it's referred to as a tabernacle. But you try to tell religious people or non-thinking people, they get up in your face. It gives them mental indigestion, because they've been taught the spook God and the spook house and the spook dimensions and the chicken wings on the back and all of this nonsensical, non-scientific malarkey, this Alice in Wonder fairyland stuff that's been foisted off on the general populace prior to this great resurgency of a scientific age. Now when we have a whole new crop of people that are starting to think, and they're going to hate me for this because they don't want you intelligent people to think. Now, and he goes on to say, to blaspheme his name and his temple and them that dwell in heaven. Now, what did we say before? Space. We're in space. Remember Job? What did we say about Job? The Almighty asked the adversary in chapters 1 and 2 of Job from the far fin. He says, where have you been? Now, if this devil, this Satan, this dude in the red jammies, if he's just ruling over this earth and we're the only bunch of people he's vexing and tormenting and controlling, then why did the Almighty have to ask him where he'd been? He did it for your benefit. And he's showing you there that, like that Yahshua said, in the Father's house there are many mansions, and this dude is in control of many of them. But you see, his lease is running out. His time is running out. He broke his contract when he killed unawares this Jesus Christ, as church world calls him, this Yahshua, which was the Almighty incarnate. And it goes on to say, them that dwell in heaven, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Now saints, santos, believing offspring, to overcome them. And power was given to him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. Now get this, whose names, that's plural, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world. Revelations 13th chapter 1 to 8 we've been quoting from, in case you want to run this tape back and you want to think about this and you want to go over this. But just think, you, unless you're in on this great conspiracy here, and I don't think you are, I don't imagine that you are, but what he's talking about, your name is in a great computer. Nowadays, in our scientific world, we call it the DNA. There's something coded in your very being that causes you to go this far into this tape program, because he said, those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, you shall be filled. But my friends, what good is it if you just share it with yourself? You should be finding somebody of like kind to be breaking bread with. Now we find it's very interesting to note that some of the symbolism here, for you are dealing with something smaller than worldwide conditions. You're dealing with a single kingdom. Rivers are often used to symbolize a mass of people. Assyria and Egypt especially have been thus symbolized. I think we pointed out in Revelations 12 verse and 15 that or Revelations 12 and 15, it says, speak of that woman Israel who was persecuted by the dragon, it says. Now, what we have to know and understand, and people have trouble comprehending this, that it didn't start here on the earth. It started in what the religious world says, but don't understand, the pre-diluvian days. And it brings it up to the post-diluvian days. And so we've been talking about what caused all of this and what brought about the destruction of worlds. Now it talks about this Israel who was persecuted by the dragon. It says, and the serpent was cast out of his mouth. Now listen to that idiom here, the symbol, and the serpent. Remember I said that serpent and dragon are synonymous. They're interchangeable. You might say John has a car or John has an automobile. Anyway, now the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a, now showing you compare, as a flood after the woman. Talking about sending a flood of people after this. And you go back to Genesis 3:15 where the Almighty talks about the woman, Israel, the descendants of Adam, symbolizing the household and the very offspring and the people of the Almighty, the Semitic people, who were the last to arrive here on this earth. And he said back then, that's what the whole door of the Bible swings on. He said, I'm going to put enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And we're talking about those people who preceded the woman Israel. And they established a government here upon the earth. You know, the 666. Now, we're not talking about all the pre-Adamic people that preceded the Semitic people, that they're all satanic or they're evil. A lot of those as a race and as nations, they're just as dumb as the white boys. You see, they were sucked into this. It's just like the German people during the Second World War. You didn't tell the Nazi Party you didn't want to go into the army, and you didn't want to fight Americans or Dutchmen or Frenchmen. You didn't do that because they would have shot you. You have a choice of two evils. Either kill people you don't want to kill, or you'll be killed. This is very much the way these people were. This adversary went around to the leaders of these worlds and got them to join, and it talks about 1/3 of the heavens. 1/3 of what? Are we talking about 7, 8, 12, or thousands of worlds? What are we talking about here? Let's consider this. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. In other words, to be destroyed, overcome by a great flood of people that were non-assimilatable, that were not of the household of Israel. Now, what I believe that we might use as an example here, I think at this time period, what was going along here, that this refers to the flood-like invasion of the Huns under Attila in the middle 400 A.D. period. You remember the people of Israel on their march out of Western Asia from the southern end of the Caspian Sea. Some of them come up around the eastern side of the Caspian Sea. Others came up around from the westerly side of it and through the Caucasus Mountains and north of the Caspian Sea. They joined forces again. They moved along the eastern end of the Black Sea. They crossed the Crimean Peninsula and they found the Danube Valley and started northwestward into Europe. But it looked to them, but it took them right across the path taken by the invading Mongol Huns under Attila. Now you see there's a couple clues here. I see, matter of fact, I had a cousin here, just recently, came and stayed with me, and she told about, like so many other people, how they chased down our genealogy and traced it back. She says, have you ever done it? And I said, yes. She said, where did you go back to? Europe? I says, no, I went beyond that. I said, I traced it back to the stars. So naturally, she thought, well, this poor cousin of mine, he needs a net thrown over him. But so many people, you hear the white Anglo-Saxon type peoples, they're called Caucasians. Well, all white men are not Caucasians, because it came from the word caucus. Those of our progenitors, some of them that migrated up into the steppes of Russia, and we go back into the revolution of 1917 in Russia and so forth, and we always hear about the 6 and 7 million Jews who were killed. Well, how about the 60 or 70 million white Germanic type Christians that were killed in Russia, butchered and starved to death? Those whose progenitors had gone up through the Caucasus Mountains and gone through the Crimean Peninsula. And here we're discussing about the people that found the Danube Valley and the Danube River and so forth. I went by, let's see, I don't know if it's still there, but many years ago I crossed the river between Quincy, Illinois and Hannibal, Missouri. And over on the Quincy side there was a restaurant down below the bridge there. They called it Denmark Restaurant. Well, they didn't even know how to spell the name. It's to be spelled D-A-N, not D-E-N. And the Danube, after the tribe of Dan, a lot of these people who were to go on and to become the Viking stock. Get your concordance out, and it tells about people who wore the horns on their helmets. The Vikings and so forth are mentioned in the Old Testament. But anyway, here we go back, and so we have this confrontation taking place of these Semitic peoples that are moving through this area. And so we find the old Satan, or the adversary, he was trying to cut them off, the people of Israel here, from getting to their ancient homelands. And we find that the frightful, countless number of these Huns that they had been and remained in the path of them, they could have literally overrun them and exterminated them, or at least swept them up in the mass and bred them right out of existence. But the Almighty didn't allow that. The Almighty had promised. Let's go back and check His promise. Isaiah 43rd chapter and verse 2. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. So we find here His promise fulfilled. So when this great flood of Huns came to intercept and to carry them away, the Almighty held them back until the people of Israel had crossed this path, this very southernmost portion of them who was still in the path of these invading Huns, but the rest of them had moved north, on up into Germany and on into the Scandinavian peninsula. So we find that the tribes of the Goths, they were being driven westward, and they came in through the southerly portion into the path of Attila's invasion, and they had driven westward before it, and the Visigoths and the West Goths, and starting from where they had been in Hungary, they moved on across into northern Italy, and they sacked the city of Rome. And as I say, as a body, they probably left a few stragglers behind. But we find that the great bulk of them, they moved on into Spain, and they settled there. Then later on, almost a generation later, we find that this flood of Huns was coming in now, that they were snapping right at their heels. Then we find that the Ostrogoths, the East Goths, they split. Some of them drove north, clear to the shores of the Baltic, where they formed what was known as northwestern Germany, and part of them split off and went westward into northern Italy, and those remained there. And they set up a Gothic kingdom that lasted for some years in northern Italy, although eventually they were overcome, but their people remained there in Italy today. You find, especially in northern Italy, tall, blue-eyed, blonde people who are in no way related racially to the short, swarthy people of the southern Italy and the areas we know as Sicily down near the Boot. Now, those are the people now remaining of what we're speaking of here, what was that ancient Gothic invasion. Now, in tying down firmly the interpretation of the significance of water, and as I've described to you, the idioms and the etymology and the symbolism, the book of Revelations, and let's take, for example, chapter 17, verse 1 and 15. It shows that the Bible is consistent in its symbolism. It being used as the same as the book of Revelations as in the Old Testament. John said, there came one of the seven angels which had the seven veils, and he talked with me, and saying unto me, Come hither, for I shall show unto thee the judgment of the great whore, this great mysterious whore here that we're talking about. They said that sets upon many waters. In other words, controls many nations and possibly races and peoples. And he said unto me, The water which thou sawest where the whore sits are people and multitudes and nations and tongues. In other words, languages. So out of the sea, this great conglomerate, homogeneous mess of all of these non-Israel people rise as this composite beast. This has in one beast the identifying characteristics of all four of the beasts of Daniel that he saw separately in his vision. Now you remember for a while the book of Daniel, that was to be sealed till the latter days, but Revelations wasn't to be sealed. Then we find the 10 horns that show that it is satanic, and it also shows that it's a continuation of the Roman Empire, which was the fourth beast of Daniel's vision. Now Daniel then says, I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded unto death, but this deadly wound was healed. And all the world, they wondered after this beast. Revelation 13:3. Now the head of the Western Roman Empire was wounded by the Visigoths around A.D. 410, wounded unto death, it would seem, because they not only took away everything that had been under the Roman domination of that area, but they captured and they looted the city of Rome itself. The city was attacked by the Vandals in around 455 A.D. You notice today, at least when I was a kid, they were still using this word vandal and vandalizing, destroying, and wrecking. Well, we'll get into that a little more later on. But then we find also the Ostrogoths in 493 A.D. And then we had Theodoric, the king of the Ostrogoths. He made himself king of all Italy. Now Rome had now changed from a military and a political capital to a religious capital. It was of no serious military or political importance after around 400 A.D. Nobody worried about them, and there wasn't nothing to go after, to steal. So they left the people alone there to just drink wine, eat spaghetti, become fat, dumb, happy, raise a lot of kids. So we find the capital of the empire, in a political sense, it moved to the Byzantium, Byzantium, in other words, Constantinople, and about Constantinople in around, 330 A.D. So here was one of the heads of the beast that was wounded unto death. These events, they occurred in the meantime. The Emperor Constantine, he issued his edict of toleration of Christianity. Wasn't that sweet of him? In the year around 313 A.D., before that time, paganism was the leading power in Rome. In other words, anything goes. And the emperors were defiled, and they were worshipped as gods, along with all the others, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, and so forth. And I think we've covered that. So we find that so Christianity, it became a officially recognized and tax-supported religion. But at the same time, Constantine took upon himself the title of Pontifex Maximus of Jupiter. Now, just how much of a Christian was this old Constantine? Was it something that is open to very considerable debate, to say the least, I would say. He put up statues of all these different pagan gods all over Rome, and then after this he issued the edict of the toleration of Christianity. In, let's see, that was in 313. And in 324 A.D., this Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Jupiter, he presided over the Christian Council of Nicaea. Now you remember I have spoken in the past how old Christianity was starting down the toilet about 325 A.D. Well, I didn't want to bum anybody out or discourage them, but it started down the old chute long before that. So you see, as we started out earlier here on a positive note, and the Almighty has always had his little flock, and every generation, like old Elijah when he was hiding out in the cave, and he said, "Oh God," he said, "they're trying to kill me." When the Almighty asked him what he was doing there, hiding out, he says, "Look, hey son, there's yet 7,000 in the land who have not bent the knee." Now, there, speaking of the Council of Nicaea, there was a great deal of division among the early Christians. Some of them said we have three gods, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And hey, folks, that's still carried over to today. I went to a great big Pentecostal church that covered about one area in Texas, 1 acre in area. Nice people, lovely people. They had the Christian principles. They had charity and kindness and generosity, and they were good to a fault. But they were dumb. They figured because they could do some Pentecostal calisthenics and all, they had it on. They had it all. Their mind wasn't open to new truth. But I saw so many different people, and it was Pastor so-and-so, and Brother so-and-so, and Sister so-and-so. And I said, "Well, you're from such..." "Yes, we're from a Pentecostal." "Yeah, we're from Pentecostal. And you call yours the Latter-day of the such and such and this and that." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Why don't you all just gather together? Because Ephesians 4 says one flock, one God, one Lord." I said, "Wait, I don't understand. What's going on?" Then they whispered in my ear, "Them people over there is oneness. Those people over there, they're Trinity." So, you see, we still have it going on today between the oneness and the Trinity. All right. Some of them said we have three gods, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and are three different individuals, and somehow or other they are still one. But this is a great mystery, because we have no understanding of it at all. And believe me, it was a mystery to them, all right. The others said, "No, we have but one God." And they were quarreling bitterly way back then over it. And this council was called at the demand of Constantine. He said, "You're not going to continue fighting over this. We're going to a council, and we're going to get together, and we're going to decide on this matter. We're going to work it out. We're going to come up with an answer." And it so happened that at this Council of Nicaea that I've talked to you about, the Trinitarians outnumbered the believers in one God. So on the Supreme Court's famous one man, one vote basis, we found that the Trinitarians, they won. And Christianity slipped another step down the old privy. Which should have been a monotheistic religion. It continued to be polytheism of three gods who, in some unknown way, constituted one God. We, of course, we know better. We know that we have but one God, as we find the Scriptures. You heard me say over and over 2,511 times, "O Israel, thy God is one God." And if you write to me, I'll send you out this paper I give away free. It's called The Wheel of God. And it proves, if you just take the time to look those scriptures up, and it shows that this Yahshua, this Messiah of the New Testament, he was truly God incarnate. Well, anyway, so we, of course, we know better, that we know that we have one God who manifested himself unto us as the Son, but who was also the Holy Spirit and the Father. So then we find around 330 A.D., old Constantine, he moved his capital to Constantinople, and on his deathbed in the year around 337 A.D., he was baptized as a Christian. Up to about 376 A.D., the Roman Senate, they had a statue of victory where they burned incense to this goddess of victory at the opening of each session, and the rise of power of the bishops of Rome began when Pope Leo the Great persuaded Attila the Hun to accept a huge money bribe offered by the emperor instead of capturing and looting the city of Rome in 452 A.D. So then by the middle 700s A.D., Rome was really governed by the Pope. Well, this head had been wounded, as it were, unto death, but Charlemagne, he revived the empire in Europe. You remember, he was the king of Gaul, and when he conquered and he made himself master of Italy, and particularly all Germany, as well as of his own country, Gaul, which today we call France, he conquered and he ruled part of Spain, as well as some islands in the Mediterranean. He became an emperor, and in fact, by his own ability, but in the city of Rome, he was crowned as emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III. This, by the way, was the first time that they ever had an emperor that had been crowned by a pope. And this is the basis of the Catholic claim that the Pope has the right to rulership over kings. Oh, I see they let that lousy rumor get started. Well, you see, you think a lot of people don't take this to heart, and there hasn't been some consternation about it. I remember a few years ago, I was a fairly young man when old Jack Kennedy come to power as president. Oh, my goodness, I had a lady tell me one day, she says, are you going to vote for Mr. Kennedy? I said, why should I? She said, oh, he's so good looking. I said, well, my God, lady, that's the answer. If he's good looking, I'll vote for him. That makes sense. But anyway, a lot of people were very upset at that time because he was Catholic. And if you're Catholic, then you're in subjection to the church, and you're in subjection to the Pope, who is in a foreign country, who is a foreign power, who's a foreign leader, who's a foreign ruler. And then we as Americans, a lot of the Protestants, they said, hey, we fought bloody wars over this, and there's been millions of people fought and died over this issue. Now, why do we want somebody in the White House that's going to go by the dictates of a foreign ruler? Because when his religious leader, the Pope, tells him this is thus and how it should be, and if he's going to be faithful to his God and his religion and his training, he's going to bend. This is what they were all bent out of shape with, but so much said for that subject there. And so, as I say, this is where they got this idea of the right to rulership over kings. And then we find that Charlemagne was there for a celebration of taking over all of Italy. And while he was there, the Pope came out with a crown in his hand and said, put it on Charlemagne's head and said, I crown you Emperor of the Romans. Well, as far as Charlemagne was concerned, why quarrel about it? He already was. So if they wanted to recognize him as such, that was all right. But the church ever since, they have claimed that authority. So Charlemagne ruled as an emperor around till 810 years after the death and ascension and resurrection of our Savior. But they continue now to call this thing the Roman Empire, thereafter the Holy Roman Empire. Boy, you talk about blasphemy. You talk about arrogance. To call it Holy Roman Empire. Because the people claim the power to create and dispose kings as a divine prerogative. So we see that this deadly wound, here's where it became fulfilled. That was prophesied. This deadly wound that was healed. Remember, it said the people worshiped the dragon which had given power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Revelation 13:4. Well, Charlemagne, he overran the Saxon people of Germany and the Visigoth people of Spain. And both of them were Semitic people. They were descendants of Adam, or Israelites, if you like. So we find, as well as the various turbulent people of Italy, he was victorious everywhere, but by 888 A.D., his dynasty had fizzled out. Whereas the founder of this dynasty was Charles the Great. The last two kings were known as Charles the Bald and Charles the Fat, and so it fizzled out. So, as it's happened so many times throughout history, that we find in the absence of a strong emperor, Italy especially was torn by constant warfare between the various petty princes and independent cities, and anybody who could conquer a village of 400 people, he set himself up as a duke, and he aspired to conquer a neighboring village of, say, 200 people, and he became an emperor. So there was an intolerable chaos continuously. It's kind of like today, you still have the leftover mafia-type people that are tearing Italy apart. Well, I see, my dear friends, we're getting very close to the end of our tape here, so would you please turn it over this at this time? We'll continue on the other side. Constantly fighting among themselves. In other words, you never could live at peace in your own city, and if the petty ruler of your own city wasn't drafting you into his crummy little army, then to try to conquer the next village 20 miles away, the ruler of the village 20 miles away was trying to conquer your city. And so they were in a desperate need of some sort of strong authority to put down all of this chaos. So they worshiped the beast, as it says. Every city or petty kingdom was getting the worst of it and always applied to some of the more powerful king for rescue. And so the rescue always meant that you were absorbed into the kingdom of the rescuer. And so we find the empire lasted. It was the emperor's policy here not to allow any petty kinglet to grow strong enough to unify Italy. So both during the times when they had an emperor ruling and the intervals in between, the popes, they exerted all of their influence to the same effect. The popes always ruled over some land in central Italy given them by earlier kings. And so they wanted to extend their power also. And if you go back and you check the history of these popes, there was warrior popes. They actually got on their war horse and went out there. And if you check back in history, there was those that had wives also. So anyway, let's go. So we find that Charlemagne, his dynasty, ran out around 888 A.D. So after a century of chaos, the the Italians, they called on Otho, O-T-H-O, the first. He was king of Germany. They asked him to come rescue them from the Hungarians, who were at that time devastating Lombardy in the north, and the Saracens from Africa who ruled Sicily. They were seeking to take over southern Italy. So after making 2 expeditions into Italy to restore order, Otho the first was crowned emperor by the Pope John XII in 962 A.D. This new emperor was the German king, and his new empire after was called the Holy Roman Empire, and it was claimed to exist as such until the year 1806. 160, well, let's see what, we're talking about almost 200 years ago. Now, after speaking of this strange composite beast here with all the characteristics of all 4 that Daniel had seen rising up out of the sea, John goes on, Revelation 13 and verses 11 and 12, and he said, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. The first beast had come up out of the sea. Remember, this one came up out of the earth. Now, isn't this mysterious? He had 2 horns as a lamb. He spoke as a dragon. He must have had a terrible identity crisis. And he exercised all of the power of the first beast before him, and he caused the earth and them that dwell thereon to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And the next beast, this one had had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke as a dragon. And this is the papacy once again, my friends. It came up out of the earth, not out of the sea. And many times here we find the word earth or world has been used symbolically in the Bible. And not always, but sometimes it refers to the so-called prophetic earth or world. See, it's confusing, because you've heard me talk about erat so many times, meaning that land, or that world, or that planet. So now it's switching on us. It's like a diamond, I said, that has so many different angles to it. But anyway, these were the areas near the Mediterranean Sea that containing the nations which were covered by these earlier prophecies. In other words, when the earlier prophets talked about the whole world and so forth, they were not talking about Germany and Scandinavia alone. They were not talking about the American continent. They weren't speaking about China. None of these areas came in any way in contact with the people who made up the prophetic world. Now, excuse me, we find that now old Nebuchadnezzar, he had another dream. He had dreamed about a tree which symbolized himself in his greatness before the period of his madness, and he told Daniel in the 4th chapter of Daniel, I saw and I beheld. And we discussed this in the past about this tree that was in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great, and the tree grew great and strong, and the height thereof reached into heaven, and the sight thereof to the ends of all of the earth. But I think, as I pointed out to you before, it's talking about he knew and he realized that a lot of these people that made up the branches of this tree are representing the culmination of all of the nations coming together in a great conglomerate, like the United States, made up of so many different kith and kin and races and peoples from the 4 corners of the earth. But here, I think symbolically and allegorically, they knew and understand those branches reaching up into heaven, that there was a lot of heaven-born people here, and the predominance of all of these people had existed, as we said, the Chinese called the trees, or the planets of outer space, trees and family trees. And just like in Genesis, which is a religious world, and few people in this world have ever comprehended or contemplated the allegories and the symbology of the trees in the garden of God, the Garden of Eden. These trees and these planets belonged to a headquarters that was called Eden. Well, so much for that. I think we've covered that quite extensively before. Now we find that old Nebuchadnezzar here, he was a very important figure in all the prophetic world of his day. And in the prophetic world in his day extended from the Tigris-Euphrates Valley west to the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. And that tree, you remember, was chopped down though the roots were left in the earth, and there was a band of brass of iron put around about the stump of it, and so forth. We discussed this before. And the tree symbolized not only the entire Babylonian Empire, but only, not the entire Babylonian Empire, but only Nebuchadnezzar himself. You remember that he went through this period of madness to remind them that he was not quite as important as he thought he was. The words, all the earth, which occurred in his dream of a tree, referred only to the area of his prophetic world and the area of his dominion. So we find the Asiatic Empire had passed away, and the development of power was in the Roman Empire, and this now constituted the earth symbolically of the time of John's vision. Now the second beast, it had 2 horns like a lamb, and the Pope adopted this title, Vicarius Filii Deus, a substitute for the Son of God. Vicarious, one who acts as a substitute in the absence of another. Now the Pope says, yes, I'm a substitute for the Son of God, but our motto is the original and only genuine one, so accept no substitutes. So that Pope claims 2 horns like a lamb. He was always claiming it. He exercised all the power of Jesus Christ, and he said he can forgive sins or he can condemn to hell and so on. And so he tries to adopt the outward appearance of a lamb. But he speaks like a dragon. His power has been exercised in the interests of Satanism. In other words, treason. Treason against Christendom, which is right and true. And if this upsets you, and if you're a Catholic, then maybe it would bear looking into some of the history. Oh, I know that this Polish Pope, he appears very calm and sweet and serene on the surface and pats the little darling kiddies on the head. But how do we know what he whispers in the ears of the statesmen and so forth that he meets with all over the world? Remember the whore riding on the beast system? Well, we're going to cover that more later. And he's taken over the office of Pontifex Maximus, who was the chief priest of Jupiter. So there's no mistake in this. He exercises all the power of the first beast before him, the book of Revelation says. The Pope claimed the power to confer the empire upon kings and to dispose them. He wouldn't crown Frederick Barbarossa, who reigned from 1152 until 1189, until Frederick swore that he would conduct a crusade to recover Jerusalem. And he excommunicated and disposed Frederick II in the year 1245 A.D. So, having horns like a lamb, but speaking as a dragon. Now, you stop and think about that. How many million men died because of the command of this lamb with the horns who spoke like a dragon, going out to kill people by the tens of thousands in a brutal way, using sword and shield and iron maces and clubs, and leaving people by the tens of thousands crippled and dying, making widows and orphans by the tens of thousands, all in the name of Jesus Christ. Well, so he was exercising the power of the first beast, this composite beast before him. In other words, there is a period in which the head of the composite beast had been wounded, and it was seen wounded as to death, but the deadly wound was healed. In the meantime, there came this second beast that had horns like a lamb, but spoke as a dragon, and he took over and he exercised the power of the first beast before him. Now we're beginning to find something out here about this symbolic beast that is in the process of getting power over the earth. And it is going to reach a stage where it says, none may buy nor sell till that he has the mark of the beast. And so now we continue on. Let's do a little refreshing here as we go back. You'll recall that the symbolic beasts that are mentioned in the 7th chapter of Daniel, you recall that Daniel had previously interpreted old Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the image which had the head of gold and the breast and the arms of silver and the belly and the thighs of brass and the legs of iron as being a vision of the 4 world empires of the Babylonian succession of empires, which were then existing or would exist in the future. Now remember, this was purely prophetic. It did not attempt to go back and give historical reviews of anything prior to that, and he had interpreted these as being Babylon, the head of gold, then Medo-Persia, then Alexander's empire, and then Rome. Now we're getting then to the same general thing here. Daniel had another vision to confirm that. Nebuchadnezzar had the first dream, but Daniel, he got his own vision. Now you remember this Daniel, I've spoke about him in our different audio tapes. He was one of the most fantastic men of God that ever ruled, that ever walked, even though he had started out as a young man, as a captive, and had had his name changed. You see, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and I won't go into all those things and what those names mean. You can look these up and find information in your own library if you care to. But he was a intellectual. He was trained. He was an intelligent man. And he sat under the succession of several kings and great rulers. For they were wise enough to realize that he truly was a great man of God, and he had God's ear. And the Almighty, the Heavenly Father, had allowed these evil men to rule, especially, expressly, for the purpose of dominating and suppressing and punishing this silly, stupid, Semitic people, the children of Israel, God's people who were constantly going wayward and never seemed to learn. Because the whole Bible, chapter after chapter, especially Chronicles and the book of Kings, it's just a succession of ignorant, wayward people that never learn from their predecessors, and they go on and repeat the same mistake. Now, when I say that this Daniel, he truly had the ear of the Most High, Daniel had another vision to confirm that. Nebuchadnezzar had the first dream, but Daniel got his own vision. But let us discuss a little bit, what did Daniel receive in his own vision? I believe it was to make sure that it was right and that he saw, one after the other, 4 symbolic beasts. The first was like a lion, the second like a bear, the third like a leopard, the fourth like a strange beast. But it had the iron teeth and the brass claws and 10 horns on its head, and head only with 10 horns. Now, these again were 4 successive world empires. And they were the same as the 4, of course, as in Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. Now we're going to pick up some similarities here. And these things that we're going through, we're taking time to educate you in there, to prove the consistency of the Almighty and to show that this is true and that we can believe His prophecy. He said, how do you know that I'm God? He said, I tell you then from the beginning. So we can get you to know and understand, receive and believe these things, then you'll be able to walk into deeper waters. And this book that has been so muddied up by religion, you'll say, my goodness, it's cleared up. It's just like my goldfish tank. Now, we're going to pick up some similarities here in this book of Revelations to show what it's talking about. The same thing among other things, that it goes beyond Daniel's vision. Revelations 12, verse 3, we saw a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head. And you remember the vision was this woman, obviously representing the entire nation of Israel, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, with a crown of 12 stars. This was pure Israel symbolically, or through the symbolism that is showing us here. And it was Joseph's dream as a boy, right over again. So there you see we have another witness, and it said, this red dragon stood before the woman that was about to give birth to the child, and was ready to devour the child as soon as it was born. Now, stop and think about that. Sounds like a possibility that there was some people there, Herod and some of his descendants. They had some Asiatic blood. You see, the worship of the dragon, we've covered the yin and the yang, and the ancient men of old that talked about the great lord of the air that came in the black dragon ships and so forth. And we understand, we go back, and I think that it was so significant and so shocking that it was the book called Shogun. You might have seen it on TV. It's a very interesting book. It's supposed to be fiction, I believe, but it was based on a real historical record. And the interesting thing about it was the great black ships of the Jesuit priests that were trading in Asia. And these ships and the men that run them and so forth, they were to be feared. The Chinese feared them. And you didn't go double-crossing them. But anyway, let us not get off our subject. But we're going to pick up some similarities here in the book of Revelation, show what it's talking about, the same thing, that among other things, it goes back and it goes beyond Daniel's dream of Revelation 12:3, as I was telling you here. It tells you saw this great red dragon, had the 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns under the head. You remember the vision was of this woman here. And it's talking about pure symbolism and Joseph's dream. So when it said the red dragon stood before this woman that was about to give birth to a child, to devour the child as soon as it was born, of course, what this is talking about is plain as the nose on your face. It was simply an attempt to kill Christ in his infancy, which he escaped. So the adversary, the devil, whatever you want to call him, he wanted to kill him before he could do his redeeming work. And it said her son was caught up into heaven to the throne of God, which gives us further confirmation and proves beyond the scope and the shadow of a doubt that this was none other than Jesus Christ. Those of you who studied our other tapes, you know this to be a fact. But now there was also this red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and there was a crown on each of the 7 heads. So this symbolizes Satan, the leader of this great extraterrestrial angelic revolt that took place way back in antiquity, that's still carried on way back there 2,000 years ago with Christ, and they were after him, and he's still here today. But only thing that we can draw comfort in is we know that his hour is short. And so this Satan, the leader of this angelic revolt, he tried to frustrate Christ's redemption of his people and the salvation of humanity by killing him in his very infancy. But we know that his plans went awry because fulfilling the scripture that no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. And so when we go to Daniel's vision, the 4th beast, which had only 1 head, and had 10 horns growing on it, he mentioned that a little horn grew up among them, which was plucked up by the roots, and 3 of the original 10 horns. So this little horn is pretty well identified as the papacy. Now, you see the symbolism here. You say, my goodness, well, why do you allow all this? And we went back and we covered in Matthew where his disciples said, Master, why do you always talk in parables? We don't understand you. And he says, because I don't want them to hear, lest at any time they're here with ears and see with their eyes, their heart be converted, something would take place in their DNA structure, whatever. And he says, then I'd have to save them. That's right, friends. There's people here upon the earth he does not want to save. There's people here that is not interested in his kingdom. And you read the books of Revelation, and around the 20th chapter, it talks about those that's never going to enter into his house again. He said, nothing defiled shall ever enter. And all these whoremongers, these liars, and all of these other people. So it's been customary, we find, as we check back through the annals of Protestant church history, that they try to blame everything on the Catholic Church, including things that happened thousands of years before the Catholic Church even came into existence. And so we find the Protestants made no pretense of anything corresponding to the Catholic Church until well into the 500 AD. So the things that happened before that obviously can't be blamed on the Catholic Church. But you see, my friends, this clever, sublimable, mind programming, subtle. You remember the scripture tells us be wise as the serpent and gentle as the dove, and it says the children of this world are wiser than the children of the kingdom. So remember, after the collapse of the original Roman Empire, there was a long period of chaos where there was nothing but a mad scramble for power by every military venture who can make himself king of a little village or 14 families or so. He was always trying to conquer the neighboring territory and add it to his kingdom. But finally, the people in despair over the chaos that were worshiping the beast at least gave them peace and order, and even if it was with brutality and repressive tyranny at the same time. But then when the papacy grew up, the ambitious popes were not able to gain political rule over any large territory of their own, and Italy broke up into a number of much smaller kingdoms, and the papal state was just one of those small kingdoms in Italy. But then they sat down, they started to do some contemplating, and they thought, well, maybe we will get a little psychological warfare, but we'll cover that. So we find here that old Charlemagne, he was king of the Franks, and corresponding to modern France, and after he had conquered a great deal of Germany and then Spain, and when he had taken over Italy, and as he was consolidating all of his territories into his personal kingdom here, the Pope saw a chance to grab some power for his papacy. So he crowned old Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans, therefore asserting the imperial crown was the prosperity of the popes, and it was theirs to confirm on whoever they chose. So it was this little horn, he plucked up 3 of the other horns. Well, something of that sort did happen. The Pope excommunicated, and he disposed Henry the Fourth, King of Germany, in 1076. The papacy withheld the imperial crown from the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa in 1152 until Frederick swore that he would conduct a crusade to free Jerusalem from the Mohammedan infidels who held it. So then when he kept his word and he led his army on the crusade, papal troops proceeded to steal some of his territory and added it to the papal states. Praise the Lord, wasn't that a wonderful bunch of Christians? Oh, praise Jesus. My God, if that was Christians, what do we got to fear from the devil? Well, anyway, in 1245, the Pope, he excommunicated and he disposed old Emperor Frederick II there. Boy, what a group, huh? No wonder Christians get discouraged. Now, getting back to what we find in the book of Revelation, you've got to get bigger things here, and a bigger thing here in the 13th chapter, beginning with verse 1, where John said, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns." And later, when you get over into the 17th chapter, it tells you that the beast was scarlet in color. Now there's trying to give you a clue, which again ties it in with the dragon, which had 7 heads and 10 horns. He said, "I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea." And the sea, of course, symbolic of what we call the non-Israel Enosh people in general, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. And the beast was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. So here you see the characteristics of all these former 4 beasts that Daniel saw: the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the odd beast that had the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Now these are now combined into a single super booger beast. In other words, Daniel saw these things as the 4 empires coming into power successively, one right after another. But John was shown the fact that these were nothing but several successive manifestations of the same power. In other words, playing the same old game, which manipulated these kings as merely pawns and pawns in the game. These empires were themselves only a part of something much bigger than themselves, and it said that the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. The beast was definitely, without being argumentative, I think everybody would agree it was satanic. And this is the system which has antedated all of these empires, and it was existence from the most early times. Like we told about Christ, it says, I'll show you things that have been hid since the very katibodal of the cosmos, since the very beginning of this world order. And the word katibodal means to razz and to totally destroy and struck. And just as they have gone about, like the Almighty describes old Satan, the devil, as a lion going about like a rampant lion, seeing that he might destroy. And remember, no weapon that is formed against you will prosper. And you know the old saying, don't go around digging holes for others to fall in, because you're going to fall into it yourself. So this sucker, his time is going to be up pretty soon. He's going to be razzed and brought very low. Well, we've covered that before. Now, it's the same thing that operated continuously through them, and in the case of pagan Rome, you don't get anything different when one of these degenerate emperors was merely succeeded by another of the same stripe. In other words, a skunk only has more skunks. It was still a manifestation of the same evil power, just under a different man, or a different name. He had a different name, but he's still the same kind of sucker sitting on the throne. Then you go over into the 17th chapter, we get to the vision of this scarlet beast, which the woman was riding on the beast, which was something astonished at these unexplained things which he saw, and he wondered what they meant. So this angel, or extraterrestrial messenger, he comes to tell him all about it, and he said in verse 7, And this angel said to me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, past tense, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. Now here is the mind which has wisdom. Some of the translators say, here's a problem for an alert mind, a wise mind. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. Now your King James version says, and there are 7 kings, as though there was something different. But the correct translation is, and they, the 7 mountains, are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. And the beast which was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7. And he goes into perdition. Remember, John wrote this book of Revelation very probably around the year 94 AD, and that's about as close as we can get to date this thing. There's a possible leeway of 2 or 3 years, more or less, perhaps 4 or 5 years afterwards, but that is approximately it in the 90s of AD. Now, when you compare this with Daniel, you're getting into something more than Daniel had. Daniel had a vision concerning these 4 empires, and we told that there are 7 in John's vision, of which 5 already have fallen, and they had their day, and they were gone. And the 4th, the Roman Empire, this is just as it was getting to its height, its peak, and John's day, this would be number 6. And so, what are these things which were great world empires in their day, and they've gone, nevertheless, they're part of this great overall satanic system of number 1. You take your choice of 2. There's a difference of opinion among those who have studied and researched into this, but I would say that number 1 is Egypt. And I told you that it goes back to the days of Osiris. That was the Egyptian name for one who I claim was one of the great fallen Cains or Khans of heaven, like those great Khans that ruled Indra, the great Khans that Genghis Khan and Bulbus Khan and all of those who claimed descent of the great warlords that came from the heavens. And so we would go back, and I think that one is Osiris. And I think it was talking about Egypt. And he was descendants of those that were of this Hamitic line who they tried to foist off on us as being the son of Noah. Not so. Not so. According to Ezekiel 14th chapter. Let's keep that in mind, but we'll leave it. Let's go on. Let me quote to you, if I may, a very respectable writer, Sice. I think you've heard of me speak of him before. He would put the first one as Cain or Nimrod's empire. We take Nimrod rather than Cain. Nimrod's very early Babylonian empire. I don't believe that he goes into any particular detail about these things, which in their day had contact with the peoples of Israel. And they influenced our progenitors, unfortunately. There's no mention whatsoever of the great kingdom of China. But I think we have covered this. I don't think Sice and a lot of these other people were aware of it. But it's woven here into the fabric, and people don't understand from the name Sin, that man of sin, that man of China, you see. They thought it was some sinner that didn't accept sweet Jesus. Well, it was more than that. That man of sin. Just go do some research on it. That is the ancient name of China. But then a lot of these would-be scholars and so forth, they don't recognize and they don't pick up the fact that there was intervention here and that all of this was interwoven, even including the kingdom of China, a vast empire that covers this enormous continent which goes back thousands of years ago. And we find it many places, and I've pointed out, a lot of people say it's not mentioned in the Bible, but I say that it is mentioned in the Bible, and we proved it to you. We pointed out the fact that who is this that comes from, says the Lord comes from Timon. But a lot of people don't understand that was part of China, and then we find in the book of Acts there where it talked about the disciples. They were told not to go to Asia. That would be part of China. I'm very sure of that. And then you search it out. Nobody ever takes the time to see why. And you look up some of those words there, explained because of their diseases. A lot of these incurable diseases that they were afraid the missionaries go over there and they bring them back with them. All right, and so we find that a lot of people seem to think that there's no mention of the very respectable in material ways through pagan and evil, of course, civilizations. They don't realize the contact that our progenitors had with the Aztecs and the Incas and the Toltecs and the continents of Americas. But I think we've proven that over and over again. And they try to tell us that they never came in contact with our progenitors, and I think that we've proved that they were wrong beyond the scope and the shadow of a doubt that they, we discussed the plains of Shinar, very, very possibly taken place in Peru, and we talk about Solomon, that I believe that the Mayan people that we know as the Phoenicians, that they were an Asiatic, Edomite, Canaanite type peoples who were merchants dealing with the whole world in those days. And a lot of people say just the known world. Well, they say that because it's not known to them that our progenitors and many other of these races and nations knew of the whole world, and they charted the courses. And there's evidence that's irrefutable today of that shows land masses and continents that existed. And well, so much for that. Now, a lot of these people, they neither understand about Cain's original empire nor Nimrod's and how they affected the people of Israel and what great vast territories that they covered, going into Asia and going into China and even to the Isles of and into the British Isles and into the Americans. And therefore I would like to say that neither of a lot of these identifications are something new that the religious world's not dealt with, and that Egypt is probably number one here in this series. That, of course, Daniel didn't have, because Egypt had passed its peak. You remember that somewhere around 775 B.C., Egypt was overrun and was conquered by the blacks from the south. And they held it for about 75 years, and at that time Egypt became the mulatto country that it is today. Because you had different types of Semitic people went in there and bred in with and mixed with these people. And so then it went from a black nation to a mulatto people that it is today, and all of Egypt's greatness disappeared. It was thereafter kicked around by every little military adventure that came along with something in the way of an army at his heel, and it ceased to be of any consequences. We pointed out to you that even Napoleon went down there, and unfortunately it was his men who used the Sphinx for the cannon practice, and that's why the nose is missing off the Sphinx. But we go back now to Daniel. He was writing about the mid-500 B.C., which was 100 years after Egypt finally threw off the yoke of the black captors, and they got rid of the Negroid blood, so that is why Daniel didn't get it. Then there came Assyria. The Assyrian Empire was overthrown and destroyed, and also Nineveh fell in about 612 B.C. But I told you that also that Nineveh, that I believe it shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was blacks, there was Asiatics, and there were whites that built up that great empire, that great city and nation of Nineveh. But we remember Daniel wasn't writing about this until the mid-500 B.C., so the Assyrian Empire was out of the way when Daniel wrote. So Egypt was the first of these five, which had already fallen, which John was writing. But see, a lot of people fail to know and understand. I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt here, he was trying to point out that it was the same people who came from beyond the stars, who infested and infected and destroyed from within and from without these empires, and it was the same common enemy that was constantly these Edom people that were constantly these descendants of what I call the Mars, the war planet, and so forth, that they were constantly still after the Israelites. Then came Assyria, which is number 2. Then number 3, which is Babylon. Number 4, which is Medo-Persia. And number 5 is which is the empire of Alexander the Great, and of all these that had come and gone, so that the angel, this extraterrestrial messenger, said these are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and that was Rome, which completes the 4 that Daniel saw. Now, Daniel's vision in the first place was entirely prophecy of the future. As of this time, it covered no review of past history. Even his look into the future only brought him to the beginning of the Christian era. It didn't carry on beyond that. Now, John saw now that he was taken up with the beginning of the Christian era, and he got the vision concerning everything from then on. Now, concerning this strange beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns, he said, I saw one of these heads, as it were, that was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. Revelation 13:3. You remember that when we're studying the Roman Empire, we saw that it split in 2, corresponding to the 2 iron legs of the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his vision, and this was the old Western Roman Empire, whose capital most of the time remained at Rome. But yet, on the other hand, it was moved to Ravenna for part of that time, but the city of Rome remained the seat of administrative authority most of the time on the Western Roman Empire. In other words, Gaul and Spain, as we pointed out before, and their North African territory for a while, and a little bit of the Balkans. Now, the part that would correspond to modern Austria, as they say, the early portion of the empire with its capital city never moving from Constantinople. It took over the eastern portion of the Balkans and, of course, Asia Minor, Syria, Palestine, and before long Egypt was added to it. But now we find that the power of the western part of the empire was fading out very fast, and it experienced a series of defeat. Now the Semitic, the Adamic, the Israelite people, if you like, the Visigoths captured and they looted the city of Rome itself in 410 A.D. Then after a short time, they moved on across southern France and the Pyrenees and into Spain, and they established themselves. They were not the only people then living in Spain. but they were the dominant ruling people in Spain, and from then on until the Moorish conquest around 711 AD. Now you have to remember that at this time that they started out the Moorish people. They were a Semitic people moving out of the steppes of Africa, or out of Africa, and they came across the continent, and they picked up other peoples as they came, and they brought a lot of blacks with them. But you know, even today, Spain has the Moorish influence of great architecture. Well, now Rome was captured and was looted, as we said before, by the Vandals around 455 AD. And it was again conquered by the Ostrogoths in 493, but it really had reached the end of its power before the Ostrogoths came along. They're on the way down the old chute, the old laundry chute, so to speak. Now, the Romans, they had degenerated to the point that this formerly great military nation, which had conquered the whole known world, could no longer defend itself, and the only way they could hope to fight off their enemies was to hire German mercenaries to defend them. Odoacer was he was the German general that was in charge of those mercenary troops. His name was spelled Odoacer. Now, he became tired of all of the trifling interference of the dissolute and the incompetent Roman emperor, so Odoacer, he disposed him from the throne. Historians in general say that the Western Roman Empire came to its end at that time. So here we have one of the heads of these 7 wounded, apparently to death, and yet John is told its deadly wound was healed. And of course, this consisted of setting up the so-called Holy Roman Empire when Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of Rome, of the Romans, in the year 800. So we find the rise of the power of the papacy really begin for the total extinction of the empire. There in 452, Pope Leo the Great, acting as intermediary, he persuaded Attila the Hun to spare Rome, as we said before, for a huge payment which the emperor had raised, and this is where the popes begin showing an influence greater than the emperor. So by the middle 700s, the pope had really a thorough grasp on the power over Rome. This concludes